Commander Veltar crouched behind the rocky outcrop, his four eyes scanning the battlefield below through his advanced tactical visor. The device fed him a constant stream of data: wind speeds, temperature readings, atmospheric pressure, target, movement patterns, everything his highly evolved brain needed to make the perfect shot. But today none of that mattered. Today he was watching a human do something that defied every law of physics and probability he understood. Sergeant Kim Nari moved with deliberate slowness as she set up her position on the windswept ridge. Her rifle looked ancient compared to the plasma weapons and energy cannons the Galactic Defense Force typically used. It was a simple projectile weapon, what humans called a sniper rifle, and it seemed almost primitive next to the advanced technology surrounding them. Veltar had seen these weapons before in the military museums back on his home planet, relics from less civilized times when wars were fought with crude metal projectiles instead of refined energy beams. The target that had drawn their attention was a Krex war machine, a massive mechanical beast that stood 3 stories tall and bristled with weapons. It was positioned 2.3 kilometers away across a valley filled with the smoking remains of destroyed vehicles and scattered debris from the ongoing battle. The machine moved in an unpredictable pattern, weaving between the wreckage as it searched for survivors to eliminate. Its thick armor plating gleamed dully in the alien sun, and energy shields flickered around its vital components. What made this shot truly impossible wasn't just the distance. Veltar had made longer shots himself, with his species' naturally enhanced vision and steady hands. The real problem was everything else working against them. The wind down in the valley created swirling currents that changed direction every few seconds. Atmospheric interference from the planet's unusual magnetic field made optical readings unreliable. The target never stayed in one place for more than a moment, and when it did pause, it was always behind cover. Veltar's own marksmen had already tried and failed. 3 of his best shooters, each from different species known for their hunting prowess, had taken their shots and missed completely. The projectiles had either been thrown off course by the unpredictable wind or had struck harmlessly against the machine's heavy armor plating. After the 3rd failure, they had called for orbital bombardment support, ready to level half the valley just to destroy this one target. But then Nari had stepped forward and asked for permission to try. The request had surprised everyone. Humans were known to be decent fighters, but their eyesight was notoriously poor compared to most galactic species. They couldn't see in multiple light spectrums like the Zersk, didn't have the telescopic vision of the Altair, and lacked the motion tracking abilities of the Vorth. By all measurements, humans should have been among the worst marksmen in the galaxy. Yet here was Nari, studying the distant target through a simple optical scope that would have been considered outdated technology 1,000 years ago. She didn't plug into the tactical network to receive wind readings or atmospheric data. She didn't use any of the advanced targeting computers that could calculate projectile paths and predict target movement. Instead, she simply lay down on the rocky ground, adjusted her rifle's position with small precise movements and began to observe. Veltar found himself fascinated despite his skepticism. Through his enhanced vision, he could see Nari's face as she peered through her scope. Her expression was calm, almost meditative. Her breathing had slowed to a steady rhythm that seemed to match the pulse of the wind itself. She wasn't frantically calculating trajectories or trying to fight against the challenging conditions. Instead, she appeared to be listening to something only she could hear. The other soldiers gathered around began to murmur among themselves. Some were amused by the human's apparent confidence in the face of impossible odds. Others were genuinely curious about what she might accomplish. A few of the more experienced veterans had worked with humans before and knew better than to underestimate them completely. There was something about the human species that defied easy explanation, a quality that made them unpredictable in the best possible way. Nari made a small adjustment to her scope, then shifted her position slightly to account for the slope of the ridge. Her movements were economical and purposeful, without any of the hurried energy that had characterized the previous shooting attempts. She seemed to have all the time in the world, despite the fact that every second they delayed gave the Krex machine more opportunities to complete its deadly mission in the valley below. The wind picked up, howling across the ridge and stirring up dust and debris. Most shooters would have waited for it to die down, but Nari simply adjusted her aim slightly and continued her patient observation. It was as if she was reading the wind like a book, understanding its patterns and rhythms, in a way that no computer could replicate. Veltar's tactical systems showed the wind speed fluctuating wildly, but somehow Nari seemed to know exactly when and where it would shift next. As the minutes passed, Veltar began to understand that he was witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just another shooting attempt. This was something entirely different, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about marksmanship, probability, and the limitations of human capability. As Nari settled into her final shooting position, Commander Veltar began to notice something that made his skin crawl with unease. The human wasn't connecting to any of the standard targeting systems that every Galactic Defense Force soldier relied on. Her rifle had no data cables, no wireless connections, no glowing displays showing wind speed or atmospheric readings. While every other marksman had spent precious minutes calibrating their weapons with computer assistance, Nari was working with nothing but her own senses. This should have been laughable. The Galactic Defense Force had spent centuries perfecting their targeting technology. Atmospheric processors could analyze air density and predict wind patterns down to the millisecond. Predictive algorithms could calculate where a moving target would be 3 seconds into the future. Computer systems could factor in gravity variations, magnetic interference, and even minor seismic activity that might throw off a shot. Yet here was this human, ignoring all of it as if it were worthless. Veltar watched in growing amazement as Nari closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the wind. She stayed like that for nearly 30 seconds, completely still except for the gentle rise and fall of her chest. It looked almost like she was sleeping, but Veltar could sense the intense concentration radiating from her. When she finally opened her eyes and returned to her scope, something had changed. There was a quality to her focus that made Veltar's ancient hunting instincts suddenly come alive with warning signals. The other alien soldiers had noticed it too. Conversations that had been flowing freely just moments before gradually died away as each species began to recognize something that transcended their individual understanding. Lieutenant Caxthor from the Vrex hunting clan stopped mid-sentence, his predatory senses picking up on an energy that felt familiar yet alien. Corporal Zenith, whose people had evolved from ambush predators on a world of eternal twilight, found herself unconsciously taking a step back from the human sniper. Even the Altarian observers, known throughout the galaxy for their analytical minds and emotional detachment, began exchanging concerned glances. Their species had eliminated emotional responses through thousands of years of genetic modification, yet something about watching this human work was triggering responses they thought they had bred out of themselves generations ago. What bothered them most wasn't what Nari was doing, but what she wasn't doing. She wasn't fighting against the challenging conditions like every other marksman had attempted. The swirling winds, the atmospheric interference, the unpredictable movement of the target, none of these obstacles seemed to concern her. Instead, she appeared to be working with them, as if they were partners in some ancient dance rather than enemies to be overcome. Veltar accessed his tactical computer and ran another probability analysis on the shot. The numbers were even worse than before. Wind speeds had increased, atmospheric distortion was growing stronger, and the target had moved into an even more protected position behind a cluster of wrecked vehicles. His computer calculated the success probability at 0.001%, so close to impossible that the system recommended abandoning the attempt entirely. But as he watched Nari track the distant war machine through her primitive optical scope, Veltar began to suspect that she was operating by an entirely different set of rules. Her movements had taken on an almost ritualistic quality, each adjustment to her rifle's position flowing naturally into the next. She wasn't fighting the wind or trying to compensate for atmospheric interference. Instead, she seemed to be reading patterns within the chaos, finding order where his advanced sensors saw only random variables. The most unsettling part was her breathing. What had started as simple breath control had evolved into something deeper, more rhythmic. Each inhalation seemed timed to match the pulse of the wind across the valley. Each exhalation coincided with brief moments when the atmospheric distortion cleared. It was as if she had synchronized herself with the natural rhythms of the planet itself, becoming part of the environment rather than fighting against it. Sergeant Tholvax, a veteran sniper from the crystalline worlds of Nexus Prime, found himself studying Nari's technique with professional fascination. His people had evolved specialized organs that could detect minute changes in air pressure and temperature, giving them natural advantages that had made them legendary marksmen throughout the galaxy. Yet, watching this human work, he began to understand that technical superiority might not be the only path to impossible accuracy. The human wasn't calculating trajectories in the traditional sense. She wasn't running mental mathematics or trying to predict exactly where her bullet would travel. Instead, she seemed to be feeling her way toward the shot, using intuition and instinct that had been refined through years of practice, but originated from something much deeper and more primitive. As minutes passed, the assembled alien soldiers found themselves holding their breath without realizing it. There was something hypnotic about watching Nari work, something that suggested they were witnessing capabilities that their advanced civilizations had never developed because they had never needed to. While they had solved the challenges of long-range marksmanship through technology and enhanced biology, humans had apparently solved them through pure, raw intuition. The wind howled across the ridge again, and this time Nari smiled slightly, as if greeting an old friend. Commander Veltar's fingers danced across his tactical computer's interface, pulling up every sensor reading and environmental analysis available to him. The numbers streaming across his display painted a picture of absolute impossibility. Wind speed variations ranged from 12 to 38 kilometers per hour, shifting direction every 4 to 7 seconds in completely unpredictable patterns. The atmospheric interference was creating optical distortions that made accurate range finding nearly impossible. His computer calculated projectile drop, accounting for the planet's gravity, which was roughly 15% stronger than standard galactic measurements. Each variable made the shot more difficult, and when combined, they created what his advanced AI systems classified as an impossible scenario. The final probability calculation flashed red on his screen, 0.003% chance of success. His computer helpfully suggested alternative tactics, including calling for close air support, requesting artillery bombardment, or simply waiting for better environmental conditions. Every logical analysis pointed to the same conclusion. Attempting this shot was a waste of ammunition and time. Yet, as Veltar glanced up from his display to observe Nari, he realized something extraordinary was happening. The human wasn't fighting against these impossible conditions. She was reading them like a complex musical score, finding harmony in what his technology saw as pure chaos. Her eye remained pressed to her scope, but her body language suggested she was processing information that his sensors couldn't even detect. Through subtle shifts in her posture, Nari seemed to be calculating something that existed beyond the reach of mathematics and physics as the galactic community understood them. She would make tiny adjustments to her rifle's position, movements so small they barely registered on his motion sensors, yet each adjustment seemed perfectly timed to account for changes in conditions that hadn't even occurred yet. It was as if she was predicting the future behavior of wind currents and atmospheric disturbances through some form of intuition that transcended logical analysis. The Krex war machine below continued its deadly patrol through the debris field, and Veltar began to notice something that his computer systems had missed entirely. The machine's movement pattern wasn't completely random as his AI had calculated. There were subtle behavioral cues embedded in its actions, micro-patterns that suggested an underlying logic to its seemingly chaotic path. The machine would pause slightly longer near certain types of cover, favor turning left over right when given equal options, and show preference for elevated positions when scanning. They were targets. These patterns were so subtle that they fell below the threshold of what his analytical systems could detect. They required the kind of intuitive understanding that came from years of observing predators and prey, hunter and hunted. His people had evolved beyond such primitive instincts thousands of years ago, relying instead on technology and enhanced biology to achieve superior performance. But watching Nari work, Veltar began to understand that perhaps his species had lost something valuable in their pursuit of technological perfection. The human's breathing had synchronized with rhythms that seemed to exist at multiple levels simultaneously. She was matching the pulse of the wind, the oscillation of the atmospheric interference, and even the subtle timing patterns in the war machine's movement. It was like watching a master musician play an incredibly complex piece, where every note had to be perfectly timed to create harmony from apparent discord. Other soldiers in their squad had begun to notice what was happening. Conversations died away as hardened veterans from a dozen different worlds found themselves watching something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. Lieutenant Hyunwoo from the Tactical Support Unit had stopped updating his mission reports. Corporal Min Jun, usually focused on perimeter security, kept glancing back at Nari with growing amazement. The most experienced marksmen in their unit began to gather closer, drawn by professional curiosity. Sergeant Jae Sung, whose people had enhanced vision that could track objects moving at supersonic speeds, found himself studying Nari's technique with the intensity of a student learning from a master. His own specialized abilities, which had made him legendary among galactic military circles, suddenly seemed crude and mechanical compared to what he was witnessing. As the minutes passed, the quality of Nari's focus continued to deepen. She had entered a state that seemed to exist somewhere between consciousness and instinct, where analytical thinking merged with intuitive understanding to create something entirely new. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, but there was no tension. In her posture, no sense of forcing the shot. Instead, she appeared to be waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself naturally. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of observation, Nari spoke for the first time since beginning her preparation. Her voice was quiet, but carried clearly across the ridge, despite the howling wind. "I need 30 seconds of complete radio silence," she said simply. "No communications, no equipment activation, no movement. The shot window is coming and I need to hear it." The request was unusual, but something in her tone convinced even the most skeptical observers to comply immediately. Veltar sent out the silence order, and within moments the entire battlefield fell into an eerie quiet that seemed almost supernatural. The silence that fell over the battlefield was unlike anything Commander Veltar had experienced in his decades of military service. It wasn't just the absence of radio chatter or the cessation of equipment humming in the background. This was a deeper quiet, as if the entire universe had paused to watch what was about to unfold. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, creating a moment of perfect stillness that made the hair on Veltar's arm stand up with anticipation. Nari's finger moved to the trigger with the kind of deliberate precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. There was no hurry in the movement, no sense of urgency despite the critical nature of their mission. Her entire body had become a living extension of her rifle, every muscle fiber aligned to support the coming shot. Veltar could see through his enhanced vision that her heart rate had actually slowed rather than increased, dropping to a rhythm that seemed almost meditative. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, Nari remained completely motionless. Her eye stayed pressed to the scope, her finger rested lightly on the trigger, and her breathing had become so shallow it was barely visible. She had entered a state that transcended normal human consciousness, becoming something between a person and a force of nature. The other soldiers around the ridge found themselves unconsciously holding their own breath, caught up in the intensity of the moment. Then, without any warning or visible change in her posture, Nari fired. The crack of the rifle shot seemed to shatter the supernatural quiet, like glass breaking. The sound echoed across the valley, followed immediately by the distinctive whistle of a high-velocity projectile cutting through the atmosphere. But what happened next defied everything that Veltar understood about physics, probability, and the limitations of conventional warfare. Through his enhanced vision systems, Veltar was able to track the bullet's entire journey in real time. The projectile left Nari's rifle and immediately encountered the first of the swirling wind currents that had defeated every previous attempt. Instead of being thrown off course, the bullet seemed to ride the air current like a skilled surfer, riding a wave. It curved slightly to the left, then straightened as it hit a pocket of calmer air, following a path that should have been impossible to predict. As the bullet continued its arc across the valley, it encountered the atmospheric interference that had been causing optical distortions all morning. Rather than being deflected or slowed down, the projectile passed through gaps in the interference pattern that appeared for mere fractions of a second. It was as if Nari had somehow known exactly when and where these gaps would occur, timing. Her shot to take advantage of atmospheric conditions that changed faster than most computers could calculate. The debris field that filled the valley presented the next challenge. Twisted metal, broken vehicles, and scattered rubble created a maze of obstacles that would have stopped any normally aimed shot, but the bullet's trajectory carried it through openings that appeared and disappeared as wreckage shifted in the wind. At one point, the projectile passed through a gap between two pieces of debris that was open for less than a second before the metal shifted and closed the space completely. Meanwhile, the Krex war machine continued its patrol pattern, unaware. That death was approaching from over 2 kilometers away. The massive construct moved with the mechanical precision that had made these machines so feared across the galaxy. Its thick armor plating could withstand direct hits from most conventional weapons, and its energy shields provided additional protection against even the most advanced military technology. The only vulnerable point was a small power coupling, located behind the main armor, a target no larger than a human fist that was only exposed when the machine turned in specific ways. Veltar's tactical computer was frantically trying to track both the bullet's path and the war machine's movement, attempting to calculate if and where they might intersect. The probability readings on his screen flickered wildly as the AI struggled to process variables that changed faster than it could analyze. Warning messages flashed across his display, indicating that the shot parameters were outside the range of reliable calculation. Then, in a moment that would be replayed in Veltar's memory for the rest of his life, 3 impossible things happened. Simultaneously, the bullet reached the exact point in space where the war machine would be. The machine completed a turn that exposed its vulnerable power coupling for exactly 0.7 seconds, and the atmospheric interference cleared just enough to allow the projectile to strike its target with perfect accuracy. The impact was devastating. The bullet punched through the war machine's power coupling, causing a cascade failure that rippled through its entire system. Energy shields flickered and died, weapons systems went offline, and the massive construct's legs buckled as power was cut to its mobility systems. What had been an unstoppable engine of destruction just moments before became a pile of scrap, metal, crashing to the valley floor with a sound like thunder. For several seconds, nobody moved. Every alien soldier on the ridge stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Veltar looked down at his tactical computer, which was still displaying the same impossible probability readings. According to every mathematical model available to galactic science, what had just happened should not have been possible. Yet there lay the destroyed war machine, smoking in the valley below, proof that sometimes the impossible was simply a limitation of understanding rather than reality. As the thick black smoke began to clear from the wreckage of the destroyed Krex war machine, Commander Veltar found himself moving toward Nari almost without conscious thought. His legs carried him across the rocky ridge, while his mind struggled to process what he had just witnessed. Around him, other soldiers remained frozen in place, their expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to something approaching religious. The silence that had been requested for the shot stretched on, broken only by the distant crackling of flames from the valley below. Nari, meanwhile, had already begun the methodical process of packing up her equipment. Her movements were calm and efficient, showing no sign of the triumph or excitement that might be expected after accomplishing the impossible. She ejected the spent cartridge from her rifle with practiced ease, the brass casing glinting in the alien sunlight as it fell to the rocky ground. Her hands moved with the same steady precision that had characterized the shot itself, breaking down her rifle and stowing each component in its designated place within her equipment pack. When Veltar finally reached her position, he found himself struggling to find words. In his 3 decades of military service, he had witnessed technological marvels that could reshape planets, energy weapons that could punch holes through starship hulls, and tactical computers that could predict enemy movements with near-perfect accuracy. Yet none of those achievements had affected him the way this simple human's impossible shot had. There was something fundamentally different about what he had just observed, something that challenged the very foundations of how his civilization understood capability and limitation. "Sergeant Nari," he began, his voice carrying a note of respect that surprised even him. "That shot, according to our calculations, it should have been impossible. Our computers gave it a success probability of less than 0.003%. How did you know it would work?" Nari looked up from securing her rifle case, and for a moment Veltar caught a glimpse of something ancient and primal in her eyes. It wasn't the cold calculation of a machine or the enhanced sensory perception of his own species. Instead, it was something that spoke of countless generations of hunters and survivors, of humans, who had learned to read the world around them, not through technology, but through an intimate understanding of natural patterns and rhythms. She shrugged, a gesture that seemed almost dismissive, but somehow conveyed depths of knowledge that Veltar's advanced education had never touched. "I just read the wind and trusted my instincts," she said simply. "The shot felt right, so I took it." The casual nature of her response was perhaps more shocking than the shot itself. She spoke about accomplishing the impossible with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather or their lunch plans. There was no boasting, no attempt to explain complex theories or advanced techniques. To her, what had just happened was apparently just another part of her job, as natural and unremarkable as breathing. But Veltar's analytical mind couldn't accept such a simple explanation. He had seen her preparation process, watched her synchronize herself with environmental rhythms that his senses could barely detect. What she had accomplished wasn't just marksmanship in any conventional sense. It was something that transcended the boundaries between conscious thought and unconscious instinct, between learned skill and natural ability. As he continued to study her, Veltar began to understand that he was looking at something his civilization had lost somewhere in their pursuit of technological advancement. His people had enhanced their natural abilities through genetic modification, augmented their senses with cybernetic implants, and replaced intuition with computational analysis. They had become more efficient, more powerful, and more predictable in their capabilities. But in the process, they had apparently traded away something uniquely valuable. What Nari possessed wasn't superior technology or enhanced biology. It was a form of intelligence that operated on principles his species had forgotten how to access. She had demonstrated an ability to perceive and process complex environmental systems in real time, using nothing but the raw computational power of human intuition, refined through years of experience and practice. Her mind had become a living computer, capable of calculations that his advanced AI systems couldn't even attempt. The other soldiers were beginning to approach now, drawn by curiosity and professional respect. Lieutenant Hyun Woo arrived first, his usual composure cracked by obvious amazement. Behind him came Sergeant Jae Sung, whose own reputation as a marksman had been built on enhanced senses and technological assistance. They looked at Nari with the kind of reverence usually reserved for legendary figures from military history. As the group gathered around, Veltar found himself thinking about the implications of what he had witnessed. If one human could accomplish something his computers declared impossible, what other capabilities might their species possess that galactic civilization had never recognized or studied? How many other problems that his people solved through technology might humans approach through entirely different methods? That evening, Veltar sat in his command post and began writing what would become one of the most important reports of his career. He recommended that the Galactic Defense Force establish a comprehensive study program focused on human combat capabilities, particularly their apparent ability to process complex environmental data through intuitive analysis. He noted that human soldiers seemed to possess a form of battlefield awareness that defied conventional understanding, allowing them to perceive patterns and opportunities that escaped even advanced sensor systems. As he wrote, Veltar kept glancing out the window toward the human quarters, where Nari was probably sleeping peacefully after her impossible achievement. He found himself wondering what other surprises the human species might have in store for a galaxy that thought it had seen everything technology could accomplish.